we will touch on all three of the major German Renaissance painters. Just had a scrap left to do with Dürer's before I reluctantly leave him. And then most of the time, we'll linger on one painting by Grenovald, and then maybe get going with a little bit of Holbein. And then I'll tell you, next class, take heart, we'll be into the 19th and maybe even possibly 20th centuries, doing a great leap over several centuries where there's no particularly famous German artist. The scrap about Dürer's work that I could not leave behind, I will now pick up on now. Showing you some more of his drawings, thinking that they're a better indication of Dürer, the person, as a personality and his interests, than certainly his paintings or even his woodcuts would be, because they're not dependent on any patron. He doesn't have to please anybody. These are primarily just for his own interest or his own exercises. So we have this wonderful sketchbook with all his notes, including like, I ate dinner with so-and-so and I paid this much for this, from his trip to the Netherlands in 1520 and 21. This trip that was a combined adventure trip for him, and then a practical one because he was pursuing the right to have his annual pension renewed by the city of Nuremberg. And he had to go meet the new emperor to get that. And along the way, he met dignitaries and other artists and saw everything there was to see. So in Ghent, he went to a menagerie where he saw the lion, the monkey. And then he also recorded these landscapes. But sometimes he also made records that are sort of more finished works, still primarily for himself. These would not be sold, as far as I know. So these are several watercolors that he did. The first ones were ones that he made on his first trip to Italy, when he left his wife 3 months after their marriage to scoot down to Italy to Venice, where he longed to stay in some ways. And you could tell that this was an early work because the perspective is somehow, although he has recessive sides here, it's not quite right. But the topography can figure it out. This is a castle in Innsbruck. And he did several watercolors there. So he's really recording very finely, all the observations he has, the half-timbered parts, the Gothic arch, how many mullions in the windows, all the features that he saw. So that was in Innsbruck, and then he approached by water, and here's looking at the whole city. There's that way. It's kind of a blurry image, but so you can see distant views, close views. And then of the landscapes, it's quite unusual if you think in Italian terms, to look at a landscape that's there largely for its own sake, rather than with a focus on the human habitation. Although you can see, of course, those are nice olive trees. And I wonder what those are supposed to be. I don't know. Doesn't look like it would be grapevines. And then the city and the castle on that. But these are places that can be recognized. And I discovered you can even take a trip between Nuremberg and Venice. It's a kind of a guided tour that would take you along Dürer's path. And this was another one of the views. Seems exceptionally modern to simply do quick washes to suggest the foreground and then just go right to the back like that. And he also did them, he continued on his return from time to time to be doing watercolors at home. And at least scholars think they can identify sometimes precisely where the locations are right around Nuremberg. This one is of a wire drawing mill just on the outskirts of Nuremberg. See, not a single person there, just largely a study of the setting sun. The long shadows cast here. That could be an early Mondrian. Well, this one is fairly frequently reproduced. Again, it seems to be a location near Nuremberg. It's clearly a work he's doing just for himself, and these are unfinished trees. The back of this sheet of paper is also has a watercolor on it, and it reveals what was his concern when he was doing that, and that was clouds. The back is just clouds, shades of Constable, and here it must be the setting sun, and just some streaks of light is this hitting only the clouds there. On that trip, here's the Harbor of Amsterdam. I wanted to quote one thing he wrote in this notebook diary from that trip, because, well, it just astonishes me. The degree of lack of personal bias in what he sees. He's just open to everything, the Protestants, the Catholics, Italian, Northern. He just embraces it all, because when he made this trip to the Netherlands, he saw the Aztec treasure that the Spanish had just brought back, because this is 1521, and what's happening in 1492, that's just a generation. So he wrote about this treasure he saw, and he said, I had never in my life seen anything that gave my heart such delight as these things, and was amazed at the subtle ingenuousness of people in foreign lands. I mean, would that we were all that open to something new. Well, on this trip he made to the Netherlands, he contracted an illness, and it's impossible from the descriptions for a certain diagnosis to be made now. It certainly slowed his work for the subsequent 7 years till he died. But they thought the thought is either that he then contracted syphilis or malaria, because it's something that sapped his energy, and times he could work and other times he couldn't. So that would be one of the reasons that his production of paintings declines, and it's then that he's largely doing portraits. Another reason that's going to affect, especially when we get to Holbein, is it's the growth of the fervor of the Reformation in Northern Europe, where many of the most art reformists said there should be no religious art, because that was like idolatry, that people were worshiping the images rather than the figures represented in the images. So the chief form of income for anyone who was not a court painter was gone. So it's a reason for their occupation. So there was this is a disaster for many artists. I'll show you what Durer did in his last years, some of in just a moment. But I want to finish with of the imageries, just as producing them as an art, was this one, because this is like, what an odd sort of coincidence there is. This is Durer's own writing, and I will read not all of what he wrote there, but some of it. he had a nightmare in 1525. And he had a nightmare of a great flood, of a great deluge. So that's what he represents here. So this is, again, for the character of the man. In 1525, during the night between Wednesday and Thursday, after Whitsuntide, I had this vision in my sleep, and I saw how many great waters fell from heaven. The first struck the ground about 4 miles away from me with such a terrible force, enormous noise and splashing, that it drowned the entire countryside. I was so greatly shocked at this that I awoke before the clouds burst. Some of the waters fell some distance away and some close by, and they came from such a height that they seemed to fall at an equally slow pace. And then he goes on describing the wind, the roaring, the velocity of it, what difference it makes if you see something close and from the distance. I said, so when I awoke, my whole body trembled and I could not recover for a long time. When I arose in the morning, I painted the above as I had seen it. May the Lord turn all things to the best. So that fear of the apocalypse was still present. And of course, the thought with this would be of the story of Noah's Ark. But now, what is the coincidence? This is Leonardo's drawing of a deluge, about not quite half a dozen years before. Now, Leonardo had always been interested in water and was a hydraulic engineer and had been often concerned with eddies and the channeling water and all about water. But in this one, it was definitely of water destroying the world as rocky cliffs are coming down to the ground. So isn't that just an astonishing tie between the two of them? Then works that Durer did that we wouldn't look at in thinking about art, but certainly artists looked at and had profound effect on them, were his publications. He did one on human proportions that he worked on for some years, thinking that there was, just as Leonardo did, there was some system of measurements of proportions that govern the ideal figure. Now, this goes back to the ancient Greeks, and it even affects the way the Greeks, the proportions for a column, that which ought to also resemble the proportions of a human body. So this is one of Durer's drawings for a book. His books were he intended to self-publish them, but some didn't get published till after his death. But there's one with his very careful drawings of his understanding of the proportions for the human form. And there's the book itself, just published, I think 1528, right after he died. Now that's a great help for a handbook for other artists. And there was, that's Leonardo's ideal man working with the same thing. And he also published in 1525 a book on measurement and proportion, describing how scientifically you could draw the diminishing sizes of things seen at your level, how you'd see them looking through that. And that was used for beginning Italian artists for over a century. It's one of their textbooks. And that's it for him. Now we go on to the figure that could hardly be more different in terms of what we know about it. I first tell you that this Mattias Grenovald, which is the name we know now, that's a made-up name. This made-up name, the person to whom we attach this made-up name, we know he died in 1528. That's the same year that Durer died. And it's only by kind of like reasoning suggestion that he was maybe born around 1470. well, he still goes by this name, but this personage, his name probably was Mattias Gotthard Neidhart. Other sources call him Meister Mattias. How does this happen? His work was always known, for a long time, very much appreciated, but his reputation diminished. And I go back and look at what I learned and what you can find now about him, that there's tremendous discoveries. What's known about him is changing all the time. So let me give you, let's get something here. His reputation is largely based on one painting, but we'll get there. This man, his name probably is Mattias Gotthard Neidhart. The Neidhart is the name of his wife. So he attached that to his name. He was a court painter. Where he studied, who he studied with, we have no idea. We don't know exactly what. We do know that he traveled a little bit. We know that at the end of his life, he seems to have been what they called a master of water arts, which would be that he designed fountains. So he's like a hydraulic engineer and a painter. For a long time, people thought this was maybe his self-portrait. Now it's pretty clear that it's a drawing that he did do, but it was for the Apostle St. John. There is a painting known by him from 1503, which I'm not going to show you. Then in a bit, I'm going to show you one of the other early works he did from around 1510. This is a work that peeked up into the first lecture. You didn't know it. This is a painting called the Heller Altarpiece, and it was a painting done by Dürer around 1510 for a merchant named Jacob Heller. It's the Virgin Mary and being her assumption into heaven. It was a well-known painting, but this is what it looks like now. But the original panel, which the center part was the only part done by Dürer, the wings here on the inside were done by his pupils and assistants. The original was bought by Maximilian of Bavaria, and he, in the 17th century, I don't know, maybe it was late 16th century, had someone who was a copyist of Dürer make a reproduction. So this is just a reproduction of what Dürer's original painting was. But the hands of this figure here are what some people thought were the genesis of the praying hands that are better known to everyone. Now, this is the very first image you saw from Dürer. The thought now is, however, this is such a finely finished drawing on such expensive paper that it's highly unlikely that it's just meant as a preparatory drawing for this praying hands here. But so it's an idea of what Dürer's original painting looked like. Now, on the exterior of these wings, which of course would fold over except on Sundays, there are paintings by Grenovald. There are 4 saints, 2 above and 2 below. This would be the panel between them. And because they look like some artist who's still finding himself, I thought, well, this must be one of Grenovald's very early works. Well, if this is around 1510, so maybe he was able to he's finishing his apprenticeship now. He's about ready to be an independent painter. So maybe he's around 30. So that would put his birthday back around 1470, 1475. So that's the kind of speculation that you get to his birth date. How does this get associated with Grenovald? Down here, there are initials, M and N for Mattias Grenovald. And the figures look very much like what his subsequent ones do. And even here at the beginning, you are in such a different realm. On one side, you have that, although it's a religious, unworldly scene done with all the perspective, the three-dimensional consistent modeling, the perfectly reasonable figure proportions. It is a visionary scene brought down into human terms and worldly terms. And then you look at what Grenovald does, and you are in something completely different. It's created by someone who certainly understands all of realistic artifice, how to make a flat surface look like something three-dimensional, create something three-dimensional on it, understanding human figures, knowing foreshortening, knowing modeling. In no way would you say this is like a Gothic artist, but he operates in a world that's in between worlds. So let's take first Saint Laurence, who could be identified not only because his name is as if it were engraved on a stone slab down here, but he has the instrument of his martyrdom, that he was roasted on a grill. So he's always shown with this grid like this. This is a figure that you would say is in grisaille, in gray. And this is nothing new. There are other painted altarpieces that have panels in gray, like the great Jan van Eyck's Ghent altarpiece has figures in gray. They are an inexpensive way of replicating sculpture. So it's sort of suggesting that these were stone sculptures. Stone sculpture being vastly more expensive and more time-consuming to produce than any painting was. The sculptors were sort of a step up the rung from where painters were. So this is the color as if it were sculpture, and it's on a base as if it were sculpture. If this is sculptured drapery, heavy stone, how does it swing over here and flip up here? If he is a stone figure, what stone figure turns its head, rolls its eyes, and looks up like this? If this is real drapery, why doesn't this respond to the laws of gravity? How does a real man have an arm of such extraordinary length that if you put it down, it's well past his knee, with a hand of this size? And this Saint Syracuse, he is a saint who performed exorcisms. And here he's shown performing an exorcism, and the text of the exorcism is in the book here, whose pages are extremely crumpled and warm. And look at that hand again, so very large. That thumb here, or her hand here. See where those fingers sprawl? There are actually some that is physiologically possible when some people are born with certain birth defects. And then up here in the shade, it is as if we have true leaves curling and bending as they grow. And well, there you have it better. You can see the name down here. How could you carve those little wisps of hair in stone? Ridiculous. Female saint, it's not known who she represents. That's the palm of martyrdom that certainly lets you know that she's a saint. Again, these leaves that come to life. And this kind of pleated drapery that kind of moves around like these are patterns that and motifs that'll come up in his art frequently. But whence comes the wind that blows her hair off to the side? What's the cause of that smile, on that emotion in that face? When I'm Googling around for information about Grenovald, let me tell you, the name was given to him in the late 17th century by the first German to write kind of like a history of German artists who had really appreciated this artist, but he applied that name. So we just hold on to it for convenience and out of respect for tradition. But the great painting we have by him now is called the Eisenheim Altarpiece, Isenheim. So that will be mentioned everywhere. This is what people flock to see. As you read in the sources, you might find mentioned, he did 10 paintings. We have 30 paintings by him. We have 20 paintings by him. It's not clear. Certainly there were many more. But what happened is that many of them were being shipped as booty to Sweden, and the ship they were in went down. So a great deal of his production, anyway, some amount of his production was lost. Unfortunately, we have this wonderful, really astonishing work. I don't know if any of you have seen this. You'll have to let me know at the end. I haven't. It dates around 1512, 1516. You see how large it is for these people now admiring it. Eisenheim is a small town. It's not too far from Strasbourg. It's in the area of Alsace, so that just north of Switzerland in the land between France and Germany, which in the various wars is going back and forth between between being French and German territory. Well, right, in Eisenheim itself, there was a monastery of St. Anthony, a major monastery, especially because the kind of people that were drawn there, not as monks, but for solace and assistance, because the monastery of St. Anthony, many monasteries, had essentially what we would say was a combination of hospital, hospice. And there was no such thing as hospital care at this time. It was members of the church that had the public charitable works, including taking care of the sick and the dying. And the monastery of St. Anthony here especially cared for people who had skin diseases of various sorts. And I will in a moment explain why that was. So this altarpiece would have been in the chapel and seen by the people who were patients there. Now, it's a very complicated piece, so I'll take you through bits of it and then we'll come back and look at it more. This is, I don't know, it must be a postcard. To give you an idea of what it's like, it's extremely elaborate. At the core, behind these wings, and we'll see this all, there's a set of gilded and painted wood sculpture by a man named Nicholas Fenhagenow, late Gothic sculptor. And it shows this patron saint of the monastery, St. Anthony. He lived in the 3rd century, in Egypt, and he's reported to be probably he's one of the first two candidates to be the first Christian hermit monk who withdrew from all of society. And his biography was written by another monk a century later, and it became one of the most popular pieces of Christian literature throughout the Middle Ages, because St. Anthony, while in the desert, was tormented by visions, and especially of demons coming and attacking him. So here's this wood sculpture, and then next to him, you would already know who this is. This is St. Jerome in his cardinal's hat, but there's his lion to recognize him, identify him. And this is St. Augustine. So that's at the very core. Now, that is what would be least often seen. Most of the time, you'd see that view that everybody was gawking at. So this sculpture was done around 1510, probably. And this is the man who commissioned it. It was at that time the head of the monastery here, an Italian named Guido Gersi. And after this was done, he commissioned Grenovald to create these double sets of folding wings. So this set is going to be painted on both sides, and this is painted on both sides. So you could open it up successively on different feast days. So that was changed, and this opens down below too. Later we'll see how that opens. So we'll look at all these separate parts of it. First, to just go through the imagery, and then we'll come back and look at the details. This is the exterior. This is what people saw most of the time. If you start from, well, maybe these two, and then we'll be moving in. But what you have here at the very center is the crucifixion. It's not the historically described crucifixion. It is a mystical image from the very beginning, because there are parts that accord with the biblical stories of Jesus's death on the cross. That here is Jesus's mother, Mary, swooning in grief, being supported by the young John, who is supposedly Jesus's favorite disciple, and Jesus had entrusted the care of his mother to John. Kneeling at the feet, wringing her hands, is a woman with this long hair who can be identified because she has a perfume pot down here. This is Mary Magdalene, who supposedly anointed Jesus's feet with this expensive oil and then dried them with her hair. So it's appropriate that she's down at the level near his feet. And this horribly battered body we will look at in some detail. So those could fit the historical account, and this extremely nighttime sky and a kind of a sulfurous landscape back here, that matches also the one account that at the moment Jesus died, the skies went dark. But over here, this is John the Baptist, who had been beheaded before Jesus' death. So this is ahistorical. This is out of time. And John the Baptist is pointing with this extremely large finger at Jesus. And we'll see there's a text written on here. It says, "He must increase and I must decrease." Which is a passage in the Bible, but it's meaning that he will die and he will be reborn. And then this down here, this is like a summation of the theological meaning of what's going on here. This is the lamb, the sacrificial lamb. So that's the symbol of Jesus. You see, even holding the cross. And from his breast spouts blood into a chalice. Now, in the Mass, down below, the priest who officiated would hold up a wafer. That's the body of Jesus. And pre the Reformation, it was absolute statement of belief that during the Mass, that bread did become the body of Jesus, and the blood did become the wine. So the priest down below would be holding up a chalice very similar to this. Down below, in this panel, which is always an awkward shape, isn't it? This is Jesus being laid out, being prepared to get in the tomb. There's Mary and John, and very different Mary Magdalene here. Now the saints on the side, these are the two wings that are fixed. The others will just fold out over them. Here is Saint Sebastian, and this is Saint Anthony over here, and I'll come back to them. Now here they are. The first set of wings are opened up. Saint Sebastian, Anthony are lurking behind here. And you get something that's far more colorful, radiant, it's like exaltation that death is past. It's again a rather interesting combination of scenes. They're more focused on Mary, but not totally. So here's the angel coming to Mary to say that she's about to, that she will bear the Christ child. And it's taking place in a kind of a Gothic chapel. Now here she is. This is a nativity. She's holding the Christ child. Back here, there's a crystal mountain. And there are angels going in and out, and they're announcing to the shepherds that Christ child has been born. And this panel is a choir of angels. This little radiant woman here, girl, that's Mary also. This is the eternal Mary, kneeling in adoration of her earthly self. And then you have to imagine all the music being played by these choirs of music-making angels. That's the celestial realm. But into that intrudes something that's part of that earthly realm too. Here's the sort of with a towel over it. This is the little, it's essentially, it's the little tub in which the Christ child gets bathed. And here's even a chamber pot. That's extremely prosaic. That's a chamber pot instead of a chalice right there. And then over here, you have Jesus rising from the dead. The soldiers who are guarding the tomb tumbling over. And it's not that Jesus is just rising from the dead, but he's also rising up into heaven. So it's, in Christian terms, it's the resurrection and the ascension going on at once. And you just watch him move into the immortal realm. Okay, then let's go one more. And here you can finally see what's behind that painted panel. This is Jesus and the disciples. And two scenes involving St. Anthony. Here's St. Anthony, who visits the other saint who could also claim to be the first of the Christian hermit saints, St. Paul in the desert. And here, St. Anthony tormented by demons. So that's the whole program, to give you a sense of just the first part. We'll get in a little closer. So this is a kind of late Gothic drive to be just as realistic as possible. Now to just always ignore when it says LMA here. These are two figures that represent men who are bringing offerings. Looking as remote as if it were God the Father is here, St. Anthony. There's the detail. So how much more explicit could any work be than that it's trying to, well, it does, I think, communicate the sense that these were real people who lived in a real time, and this is what it was like. So what do you do with this? Well, it has so much to do with the kind of ailments that were treated here. The specific and terrifying disease, malady, let's say it's malady, that this treated was something called ergotism, ergotism. It was another several centuries before there was a scientific understanding of the cause of it. The manifestations of ergotism were hallucinations, convulsions, terrible skin eruptions, boils, necrosis of the skin, hideous, painful, terrible hallucinations. And then there were, and also the plague was a recurrent something in Europe. And so this hospital worked with people who had both of those. And see, that's why it's so appropriate with St. Anthony, with his visions as they were recorded in this medieval manuscript, is that he was attacked by demons in the flesh. They weren't so much spiritual torments, but he had suffered even to the point of death from all these physical, being assailed physically. So for people here, they were in an environment where the revered saintly figure had gone through what they went through. And it is here, this is Jesus on the cross is going through what you've been through. And there's the hope of life after death, just as Jesus's was. So the whole thing has a completely theological underpinning. Meanwhile, the representations of, especially on the flesh of the Christ here, are said to be just astonishingly accurate depictions. So now we'll go through and take these bits by bit. Now, Saint Sebastian, he occurs very often in religious art, I'd say well into the 17th century, because he was the patron saint of plague sufferers. The story of his martyrdom was that he was a Roman soldier who was converted to Christianity, and this is in the 3rd century when the Roman emperors did not tolerate this. So at first he was, the troops were ordered to put him to death with bow and arrow. So you always see him with arrows piercing right through his body. But then supposedly the arrows didn't kill him. I can't remember. Ultimately, I think he had to be beheaded. But you always see him like this. So this is the message of a possibility of surviving the ailment such as the plague. Gotta forget this, let you know that this is taken from a painted reproduction. The original is, I think, being restored right now, and I lament that I don't have any slides that show the gorgeousness of the real color of this. Anyway, here you have him, the saint. That has to be a portrait of some individual known to Grenovald, and a lovely landscape. Nice understanding of parts of the body. And then look, how does this clavicle, this side of his chest, square with this one over here? And again, he's doing these forms of twisted, curling, sausage-like forms. That's like a visual motif that occurs again and again and again in his work. So this is stone base with living stone leaves. And there's a window back here. We'll see what's happening to him in the window. Here's St. Anthony. with his the cross that identifies him. And the combination of the intensely realistic. Look at the way the two levels of this garment are pinned together at points. Just the way it was made. And yet these hands were the size of this cloak. And the demon trying to break through the window to get him. Wonderfully done. Wonderfully realistic. You know, Bosch is from around the same time on the Flanders. So this is it's not unique to Grenovald. Now we're moving to the central panel. First of all, the sense of the great weight of this hideous figure. It's not a cross raised up high, and the weight of this body is even pulling down this rough-hewn cross arm. The closest that I could find of anything like this is by Botticelli from about 15 years earlier. Probably Botticelli made this for his own worship, because in Florence, the monk Savonarola was preaching the same, the world is coming to an end, and there was a really hysterical conversion on the part of many Florentines, and burned a lot of works of art. Botticelli had a complete change of heart. He destroyed some of his work, and his late works had this same kind of freedom from the constraints of reality, or this world reality. But Botticelli can't go this far. So the blood is already drained from his mouth. The garment is torn, the flesh is pricked. See there. Some of these are suppurating sores, and others the skin is already dying around it. But the pull of this, there's that. He knows all the reality, all the conventional physical reality, which he is then able to manipulate to create this new world. A crown of thorns so great that it reaches down in here. It's suggesting a history of his torment. Because, I have to say, look at the compositional issue he faced. If you did, as you ordinarily do with a crucifixion, you put the figure right at the center. Well, if this is on the outside of the wings, you can't divide the figure of Christ. So that's why you have this balanced against one large figure reaching out over here. So push it over to the side a little. And he's horrifyingly ugly. These curving lines, look how he even does that, moving the neck around there. Just what incredible inspiration. It's kind of rictus of pain. This like bolt going through here. And the grain on the wood, all very well done. Now she, in sympathy with her son, is just as pallid as if she were already dead, as she faints away. And this is a standard trope in the religious images in the North. But here he too is much. Look at that arm, how it comes around. From where? To that size. And this curve is like a repeated curve. So there's like from the modern point of view, there's kind of like this abstract, gorgeous sense of harmony in the design, however discordant the theme is or the emotion is, because see, that's the same curve there, the same curve here. The twisting patterns here, his robe, her robe, moving on over here. It just continues that same curve. And she rings and rings and rings her hands, and her sleeves go round and round and round. And the thickening blood drips. This extraordinarily thick felt-like cloth, which is not reacting to gravity, it's sort of twisting off to the side on its own. You see this idea, these big, thick, twisted cloths. Of course, I was always picking up on that. Then this is not a very good image, but I have nice details of the body now as he's been taken down and is about to be laid in a tomb. And his size compared to the purely mortal figures is completely different. Now this would be the Mary Magdalene now. As you stand in front of the altar, this would be down at your level where you'd see this most clearly. And we look at the sections inside. Oh my goodness. You know, we're not even going to get through this altar next time. Oh my dear. So what happens to the laws we think of gravity and reality here? The angel is rushing in with the urgency of the message that she's to bear the Christ child, enough so that her head jolts back. But the cloth, instead of flying behind her, flips toward her, also carrying the message, just like her hand. And look at this saint. Now, this would be a carved saint who's foretells the coming of the Christ child up here. That's Botticelli again in that post-Savonarola up here. Oh my goodness, that looks tame compared to this. The intensity of that look. And then I'll show you the details of this section. Again, where these turn from stone to life. And because I don't have good color, I'll just tell you to watch and imagine what it's like in reality. This music-making angel's robe goes from grays and blues into reds and oranges. And this goes from greens to pinks. So color also obeys non-earthly rules. You get a little bit better sense there. Sometimes there's speculation that this is the evil angel Lucifer back here, but that's just speculation. Certainly the different choirs of angels. You imagine the music. And there you have a good color detail. And a lurking demon. Another one here. And that eternal Mary. We're going to have our own choir for my cat here from the end. And then we'll look at what's going on over here. This is a little bit better color. There's some conventional symbols of Mary's virginity, like a rose without thorns and an enclosed garden. But don't have anything to tell you about this, making this figure of Jesus standard. As a baby, truly, he has to have his head held up, but it also suggests a dead figure. And his swaddling cloth is the same torn garment that he wears on the cross. Oh, I got to go back for one here. I have to go back to art history for a minute and out of the meaning of this. Look at there's triangle. Oh, he knows Renaissance art. That could be Raphael. Up in the clouds. And then I'll show you several of them. Resurrection and ascension. The force of this miraculous event has all the guards tumbling. And look what happens to the shroud as it shifts in colors as you move up. The closer you get to his body, the more incandescent it is. Now, that is the ultimate promise and the ultimate solace for all those people who are in the hospital dying of these very painful skin diseases. There's something better to come. Well, I'll get through these two, and oh my goodness, then we will be through. I'll give you these, just not talk about so much, just show you. They're living in the desert. There's a raven bringing them bread to eat. He ordinarily only ate palm dates, so his symbol is date palm. And I've never had a detail to see that these are actually absolutely accurate representational of presentation of medicinal plants down here. There's the St. Anthony. And there's going to be a text down here. See, I just got to rush to get you through this text. So this is a description of, supposedly he was withdrew into a cave and was so tormented by demons that they killed him. So Anthony's acolytes, I guess you'd say, pulled him out and managed to revive him. And he insisted on going back in to continue the battle with demons. And he cried, from which he survives, but he will cry out to God. And that's what's going to be down here. And it says, "Where were you, and why did you not appear at once and spare me these torments?" So that's the cry. That could be the cry from everybody cared for in the monastery. So we look at these demons assailing. whose skin is also tormented by these sores. And that figure down who just seems to represent what ergotism does. But then also, and then look at the Bible down here with thorns in it, just as Christ's body had been. So I will finish with this figure who so echoes Anthony's. There's that shift in color. Our time is up. I can't believe that. I will try to remember to tell you a little about the subsequent disfavor and favor this painting went into. This is certainly a painting that influenced 20th century artists we're going to look at from the 1930s. So I will stop reluctantly. And again, if you have questions, comments, please do. Anybody? It's kind of like, what is there to say after looking at this?
Did you say Bosch was a contemporary?
Just about. Bosch is just a little bit earlier than him. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that horrible fear around 1500 that the world was coming to an end led to this kind of extreme this is also the time of the Reformation. I mean, religious hysteria, religious wars. There were tens of thousands of people killed. It's just.
Do you think they knew each other's art?
No. But there are various prints that show things like those kind of devils that were popular, and they probably both knew they probably knew some things in common. But in terms of painting, I don't know where they get that fantastic way of painting. I think they really did do people in. Well, go out and take a walk. It's a beautiful day. And when we get to Holbein, Holbein's father took him to see that painting. It became a great cult object in Germany in the time of World War I, too. I mean, it's like, this is it. It's big stuff. No more.
I just want to say thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you. That was wonderful, Maggie. My one comment was the gold paintings. That gold must have cost a fortune to paint with.
Sure, it did.
There's a lot of gold in a few of those pictures you showed.
Yeah. Well, the patrons, if they could afford it, would want that because, of course, that's a display of their wealth. That I could afford a painting that had this much gold. Yeah. Okay, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie.